Inside Out, we're still emotionally moved. I've just finished a playthrough and I was crying by the end of it. And it's just pretty incredible. And I'm extremely proud of it. The team is extremely proud of it. And we can't wait to hear what you guys think once you finally play it.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 and how I think Naughty Dog mistreated and underutilized Ellie's character. This is all coming off the top of the dome, so I apologize if I mispronounce anything or ramble on a bit. And I'll try to avoid talking about Abby as much as possible because I think she deserves her own video discussion in her own right. First off, I want to start by saying that I did not hate the game. I think the game is fine as its own thing, but as a sequel, it does fail. And on that note, I want to transition into the flashbacks, mainly because the flashbacks is what a lot of people wanted. The flashbacks themselves are really well written, and the reason that is because they're not really connected in any way, so you don't have to try to make a coherent story through flashbacks. So they can just pick up at any point between the 4 years, which gave them a lot more writing liberties. But the problem that I have with the flashbacks is that Ellie in the flashbacks themselves feels different in one scene, completely different to how she was in another scene. It just doesn't feel natural with Ellie's character. Everything else is fine. The story there itself between Joel's and Ellie's relationship beginning to tarnish, I think, was a really great opportunity to flesh out both characters and express how Ellie feels about Joel lying to her. But the idea that Ellie wanted her life to matter, I think, contradicts what the game sets up from what we know about Ellie in the first game. Right before Ellie and Joel go into the hospital in the first game, both of them are talking about things that they like to do afterwards. So neither one of them were expecting Ellie to die in that hospital. They just thought they were going to run tests. But then in this game, they try to shift the narrative that Ellie wanted to die for her life to mean something. But at that point, Joel already told Ellie that he means basically everything to her, and which makes Ellie say okay at the very end of the game, which I think kind of gets misconstrued in this game because they try to force Ellie and Joel to be the bad guys, and it doesn't really work in the way that we already played the first game. We know why and how events played out. The flashbacks are structured differently from the game in a way that they're like small bites of life compared to the long story that we're given. And the story itself is fine, but the pacing is what ultimately kills this game. You get flashbacks inside of flashbacks when you're playing as Abby, which is borderline ridiculous. Once you do that in a game or any type of media, I think you've already failed in telling your story in a proper way that a lot of people would have understood and felt was fine or comprehensible. And that segues into Seattle with Ellie is some of the worst writing I have ever seen in any PS4 exclusive. Not in media itself, but as a PS4 exclusive, the writing for those 3 days is borderline bad. It's really bad. And the reason that it's bad there is because it's literally Ellie go to point A to point B, and then the next day go to point B to C, and then the day after that, C to D. That is literally what Ellie's section is, and she only gets one meaningful scene that I personally felt engaged with, which was the Nora scene. That scene had emotion and a weight behind it. Every other scene, like Dina saying she's pregnant, came completely out of left field, and it didn't feel natural. Yes, they hint towards it with a few dialogue moments and stuff like that, which is fine, but it just completely comes out of left field, and the way that the story tries to go like, okay, Dina didn't believe Ellie, alright, and then Dina just says, I'm pregnant. It just doesn't make sense for Dina not to tell Ellie before they left, or sometime while they were on the way to Seattle. It just doesn't feel right. And then when you get Seattle day 2 and 3 with Ellie, she meets Jesse, and Jesse isn't even along for most of the ride, so you don't really get to bond with Jesse. I will say that I like Jesse from what we got to see of him, but he is so short-lived. He has like a total of 7 minutes screen time, I believe, which really sucks. I'm not talking about gameplay and stuff, I mean actual cinematic wise. And when you go into Seattle day 2 to 3, Dina is already forgotten. Basically, Ellie has nobody to bounce off of, and you're left with this depressed, boring Ellie that we're given in this game. And some are gonna say it's understandable that Ellie is depressed, which I agree with, but it's been 4 to 5 weeks after Joel's death. She should have lightened up about cracking a few jokes here and there. I'm not saying be as cheery and Mary Poppins as she was in the first game, but she definitely should have had that ability to express herself like she did in the first game, just a small bit or so. But with her not having anything to bounce off of, you're left with feeling bored playing Ellie's sections, because you already know that when you meet this person, Abby probably already isn't going to be there. It's basically like Mario and Bowser, and the game just straight up tells you the princess is in another castle. That's what the game feels like in Ellie's portion, and it doesn't work in a way that it feels satisfying whatsoever when you actually do find any of the victims that Ellie is trying to get information from. You just are like, okay, well, they're dead, on to the next person. And Ellie's Seattle section itself is fantastic, especially Seattle Day 2. That is hands down the best gameplay segment in the entire game. Not only the Nora section, although that's my favorite part of the game, I think the entire Seattle Day 2 with Ellie was fantastic start to finish. The story itself there wasn't good, but the gameplay, the atmosphere, and all of that was fantastic. But then after the theater with Abby, on a side note actually, I want to talk about the theater and how dumb they made our characters. We are expected to believe that they didn't block upstairs, they didn't cover the windows, they didn't turn off the lights if they couldn't reach the windows. They literally could have just used the actual theater as a base of operations. They had no reason to keep that main hall unsecured or anything like that. And especially when there's 2 entrance points, and you can argue they'd assume that nobody would have been able to get through because the ladder was up. It doesn't make sense that nobody still would have been down there watching it. And we are also expected to believe that Ellie would have circled the theater on the map so Abby would know their location. That doesn't make sense because Ellie would have already known where she was. It makes literally no sense for her to circle her location if she already knows where she is. That's just a oversight, I think, by the writers. They could have done a lot better with trying to justify how Abby found them or something, anything, and just not having our characters be dumb or whatever. But after the theater segment, we don't get any explanation on how all three of them got out of there. I have no clue how we are expected to believe that Ellie, Dina, and Tommy got back to Jackson unscathed, unharmed, or anything like that. They didn't have a horse. All three of them were injured. So I don't know how they got back, especially when the Seraphites and Wolves were probably still at war at that point. We don't know because they don't really tell us who won that fight. It just feels weird in the way that they try to just cover up Ellie's story and then try to force you into the epilogue. The epilogue itself was good until Ellie leaves to go find Abby. I liked every bit of the epilogue, and I think that would have been a reasonable ending to leave Ellie with PTSD. I think that would have been fantastic. It would have been a great way to close out the story. But instead, Ellie goes after Abby because Tommy gave her a hint, or he got a rumor from somebody. So, with Tommy already being handicapped and crippled and he can't see out of his eye, now Ellie goes on this solo mission for who knows how long it took her to get to Santa Barbara. I'm assuming the devs forgot to add dates, because as soon as you hit Abby Seattle day 3, they literally just stopped using the subtitles where they tell you day 1, day 2, and all that, or like they did in the first game where it says winter, spring, fall. They just completely forgot to say anything throughout that, which made it confusing to know how much time has passed. It's definitely been over 9 months, but we don't know how long it took for Ellie to get to Santa Barbara. We don't know how long it took Dina and Ellie to set up the house. We don't know any of that. But as soon as Ellie arrives in Santa Barbara, she is so hell-bent on killing Abby, which is fine. But we are expected to feel sympathy for Abby after we see her strangled and all of that. And if Ellie didn't want to kill Abby, she literally could have just left her hanging there. You know what I mean? She would have died from starvation. But instead, Ellie walks with Abby for no reason whatsoever after she cuts her down, and then she drops all of her weapons and fights Abby with her knife. Why? I don't know. It makes no sense to believe that Ellie would have just dropped all her stuff, although Abby killed Joel unarmed. And to anyone that believes that the Abby and Ellie fight was only centered on Joel, I think we're in the same mindset that the devs were, because they forget about every other thing that happened prior. The final fight between Ellie and Abby is not only about Joel at that point. At that point, it should have been about killing Jesse, it should have been about crippling Tommy, and it should have been about resolving her PTSD. And let alone that, I don't even think that Ellie would have stopped attacking Abby, because she was already having adrenaline and stuff. When you have adrenaline, you are going based off of instincts and actions. You are not thinking straight. The only thought that both of them would have had was straight up just survival. It would have been fine if Ellie regretted killing her, but she doesn't. And then she gets a flashback of Joel that explains why she doesn't kill her. But that should have made Ellie want to kill Abby even more, because you're reminded of something that she took away from you. And on a little side note again, if you look at the scene where Abby bites Ellie's fingers, Ellie purposely puts her fingers above her mouth, which makes no sense. It's dumb. It's really dumb. But then she lets Abby go without any scar or anything. And you could say that Abby is scarred mentally, but Ellie doesn't know that. She can assume that, but we don't know what happened while Abby was tied up. We don't even know how long she was tied up. We don't know if that was a month after the theater. Who knows? But then Ellie loses literally everything. Literally every single thing. And the game tries to preach this message of forgiveness and revenge is bad. And the forgiveness idea comes from the last 10 minutes of the game. It completely comes out of left field. But revenge is bad is counterplayed by revenge is good, because Abby still is left with something to cling on to. Ellie and Tommy did what Abby couldn't in 4 years. In less than 4 years. So why is revenge bad if Abby is given freedom? She's given a person that she cares about to still go along with her. She still has all her limbs. Her body is functioning fine. While Ellie girlfriend leaves her, she doesn't have a stepson. Her surrogate uncle hates her and all that. She can't even play the guitar, but then she just comes to terms with that. That's what we're expected to believe. We're expected to believe that Ellie would think she is wrong in that manner. And that's what I hate about the ending of the game. You literally could have ended it with Ellie just having PTSD. That's her mental scar. Instead of literally dragging Ellie through the mud completely all the way through. Ellie arm gets broken. Ellie ends up being tied to a chair or a table. Ellie gets punched in the face. Ellie gets jumped. All of this stuff. Ellie gets attacked by dogs. But Ellie gets shot in the shoulder with a bow. But then it's just all, nah, I was in the wrong. She's right. I should forgive her. That makes no sense. They should have ended the game right then and there on the farm to give us that justification of, okay, maybe Ellie is too scared to go fight Abby again. That would have been perfectly fine. But at this point, we don't know what the story can go. If we get DLC, it's probably going to be a flashback. If we get a third game, who knows? Me and a lot of other people already have said this. The second game should have used new survivors. We did not need to follow Ellie and Joel's story. Their story is done. It was done in the first game, and it was expanded upon and left behind. There is nothing that needed to be said or added on to the story. And the way that you treated Ellie in this game, by making her feel unnatural and uncharacteristically like herself, is something that a lot of people have picked up on and hate. Like I said, I don't hate the game. I'm disappointed in the way that they give this new character all the set pieces, the scenery, all the new intricate boss fights and creative, while Ellie is only given one good day in Seattle that is wonderfully crafted, but after that she is treated like a side character, while the new secondary protagonist is given more screen time than her and her entire cast. Is ridiculous to me. If Naughty Dog does do a third game, don't use Ellie. I don't want to hear about Ellie. I don't want to hear about Abby. Please just use a new group. There's nothing else that you can add to the story at this point. I don't even think Ellie will be able to shoot a gun correctly. I can't remember if it's her left hand or right hand, and I'm pretty sure Ellie isn't ambidextrous. So please just use a new cast. I don't want to see Ellie in another Last of Us game. I really don't. There's nothing else you can do with her character. You've completely made her a shell of her former self, physically, mentally, with writing, all of it. I don't want to hear anything from Ellie. You can use Abby, but don't force her to be a protagonist, because me and a lot of other people don't care for Abby as much as you think. I don't hate Abby, but she definitely isn't as engaging or as interesting as Joel and Ellie were. And you effectively ended up killing both of them in a span of a short 25 hours that they were only given 9.5 in.